This is Deepa Iyer, and I am with Building Movement Project. And we are live, and we are going to have our fourth conversation that we're having to talk about solidarity. And this is part of the solidarity semester, as folks know. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm going to bring Ahmad Abuznaid on in just a second. And before I do that, wanted to just remind everyone that this is week 4 of the solidarity semester. We have one more week. For those of you who are part of it, you know that we have been talking about social change and solidarity practice over the last 4 weeks. We've also been in conversation with some really inspiring movement leaders over the past 3 weeks as well. And tonight, of course, we are going to be hearing from Ahmad Abuznaid. And I also wanted to let folks know, if you are new to Building Movement Project, welcome. And if you're new to Solidarity Semester, welcome as well. If you are interested, I wanted to let you know that Building Movement Project just yesterday released a new report on the effects of the pandemic and the protests on people of color-led nonprofits in this country. We made a lot of sobering findings about how organizations are confronting COVID-19 and structural racism. And if you are interested in the nonprofit sector, if you're interested in how people of color leaders are doing right now, I really urge you to check out that report. We'll drop it into the chat so you have the link as well. But really excited to have everyone here, and hope that you will continue to follow us and continue to learn about the work that we're doing at Building Movement Project and Solidarity is. So as I ask Ahmed to come in to the space, I also wanted to ask you all, as you are coming in, what are you bringing with you? What kinds of feelings are you bringing in with you? Everyone is welcome in this space, right? But what is on your mind as you're coming into this space, whether it is a feeling, whether it is a question, whether it is a phrase, please drop it into the chat. Would love to know. And I will say that for myself, I have felt a little bit discombobulated this week, and that is where I am. But would love to know is also thinking and feeling as you come into the space. So just go ahead and drop that into the chat. Hi, Ahmed.
Hey, what's happening, Deepa?
How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here with you all tonight.
Yes. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for making the time. I know you're super busy.
No, this is great. I can already tell the vibes. This is perfect. This is exactly what I needed for my Thursday evening.
That's great. That's great. Well, as you know, Ahmed, this is the Solidarity semester. We've been doing this for 4 weeks now. So our target audience are young folks 18 to 25 who are really starting to get involved in social change. And a lot of the generational moments that are happening right now are what are getting people to get involved and get engaged. Yep. And so these Thursday nights, we've been doing the conversations with movement leaders like yourself. And I was trying to remember when we met, and I could not remember. You remember?
I mean, when you brought up Ferguson in the email, I started to think, was it Ferguson? But I think Ferguson might have been it.
Okay. Yeah. So folks, thanks for folks who are coming in and you're sharing, and folks are sharing. A lot of folks have the debate on their minds. We might get into that. But feel free to share with us what is on your mind as you're coming into this space, whether it's a feeling or a question, whatever it is that you are thinking about as you're coming into the space. But Ahmed, I want to get started by asking you a question actually that is really about these generational moments, right? So as I said, young folks are being, really motivated to act and engage because of the pandemic, because of the uprisings over the summer. And I know you've talked about generational moments that have made a difference in your life and that have affected your trajectory for social change and getting involved. So can you tell us a little bit about some of those experiences that really charted and paved the way for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Deepa. I think, first and foremost, like every activist or organizer should be able to identify these moments. They're truly like catalysts for what drives us to become, who we're going to be, and to keep fighting when sometimes we're exhausted and we're kind of fed up. But I'll share a few experiences. A couple I'll share from Palestine, and a couple I'll share from some of my movement organizing and years of development in that regard. When I was a kid, I grew up lower middle class in the United States. I was born in Jerusalem, but at age 1, my parents were able to take me to the United States to grow up there. But by age 7, the time had come to go back to Palestine. My parents made the decision. It was time to go back to a homeland that at that point I didn't know. But Palestine and the occupation will make you grow up really quick. So my mother and I landed in Tel Aviv Ben Gurion Airport, and we were immediately escorted to a separate line and strip searched. And so as a 7-year-old kid who was lower middle class in the US and, fair skinned, I had no experience with state sanctioned violence or discrimination up until that point in my life. But there you are at 7, being strip searched next to your mother, and it's very apparent to you that there's something wrong here. Yeah. And then, over the years living in Palestine, I would, go through military checkpoints on the daily basis just to get to school. And it became clear to me that these were checkpoints just for Palestinians, not checkpoints for all, to protect every person from some, danger that is around, but because there was a collective punishment being levied upon the Palestinian people for our years and decades of a fight for self-determination.
Right.
One more experience I'll lift up from Palestine before I get back to the movement work in the US is in 1994, I was 10 years old and I was living in the West Bank in Hebron. And a settler from Brooklyn, New York, went into the Ibrahimi Mosque, one of the most treasured mosques within Islam, and particularly in Palestine. And he opened fire during the holy month of Ramadan, during morning prayers, and murdered 30 Palestinians and injured well over 100. And I remember at 10 thinking, well, I at that time had such a strong belief in humanity, such a strong optimist that I remember telling my parents I thought that the Israeli soldiers would help us. Because of what just happened to us, I thought that they would see the humanity in us. They would see that we were being, brutalized. They would see that we were being ethnically cleansed. They would see that it's just wrong the way we were treated. But then that was a day of waking up, right? One of these moments that we hold on to, because I recognized again at that moment that certain systems are not built for us. And in fact, certain systems are meant to hold us down. And so in the immediate aftermath of this massacre, not only did the Israelis not respond to support the Palestinians who had undergone this brutal massacre, but they actually enforced what's called mamnu' al-tajawwul, or a curfew. And so that meant that for me as a 10-year-old kid, for 2 weeks, I could not go to school. I could not go outside to play. There was no going downtown to buy things from the stores. We simply had to stay put in our homes. And the Israelis do this because, again, collective punishment. They know that there's going to be resistance in the streets after such a massacre. And part of the way to quell that is to threaten everyone with bodily harm, abuse, and being locked up if you're found in the streets. So they enforce these curfews.
And these are experiences that you had at a really young age, right? That made you very clearly aware that there's a double standard, that there is treatment, that there's discrimination, there's inequality, so how did that then influence the way that when you kind of came back to the US and started looking at what is happening here, right? How did those experiences influence you, and what connections were you able to make?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, many of us experience these things, but maybe it's not necessarily the catalyst for activating us. And so I have to say that for me, I was so young in Palestine, I didn't grasp what it meant to resist or what it meant to organize for our liberation at that point. But I will tell you that by age 12, when I returned to the United States, the veils were off, the blinders were off. I could now see exactly what the U.S. was, even at age 12. And I didn't have the definitions. I didn't understand the systems. I didn't understand capitalism and patriarchy and racism. But I recognized that as I stood in my classrooms, there was a difference in the treatment of Black classmates and white classmates, a difference in the criminalization of Black friends and colleagues and white colleagues. And again, I didn't know, I hadn't read The New Jim Crow, which is, by the way, wasn't out at that time, but there wasn't a scholarly, route for me to figure out what was happening. I was just a young kid who had just come back from Palestine being oppressed. And I started to notice that while things were easier on me in the United States, that wasn't the case for everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that really led to, continued cultivation of relationships with Black and Latino folks, because I recognized that what was being done to some of these community members in the United States was very similar to what, I had undergone in Palestine. And it's not the same. We never want to say that any of these struggles are the same, but there are parallels, and there are systems that have very strong parallels.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And we say that often in the Solidarity semester when we're talking about principles of solidarity, that it's important to find, like you said, connections and commonalities, but not to flatten all experiences into one, right?
That's right.
But to recognize, and I love what you said, it's oftentimes about what are the systems of oppression that are replicating the same sort of discrimination and injustice on different communities. Like, how do we focus on that, right? But not saying that we're all the same, or that there's a hierarchy. But I know that you said, Ahmed, you said often that what happened to Trayvon Martin was a generational moment for you, and kind of led you to do the work that you did. I mean, you were one of the founders, right, of the Dream Defenders. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because that also happened, if I'm not mistaken, that also happened while you were either in college or graduated from college. And so there are a lot of folks, I think, who are watching and who are joining our Solidarity semester who are in that age range. And what did it take as a college student or a graduating college student to be like, you know what, I'm in this fight, I'm gonna like found an organization, right? That takes a lot. So can you talk a little bit about those experiences?
Sure, thank you, Deepa. So I was in undergrad. I was 21 at the time, so I was going into my senior year at Florida State University, and I was student body vice president. So I'd actually been involved in SGA or student politics, and I found that we weren't having the impact that I envisioned having as someone who had a vision for a better world. SGA politics, you're usually fighting campaigns like tuition freezes. And fighting to keep computer labs open for students and free printing available for students. So that had been my experience until 2006, when a young Black boy named Martin Lee Anderson was killed. Now, the news came out first with an autopsy report stating that Martin Lee Anderson died due to complications from sickle cell anemia. And as a Palestinian American, I was ignorant to the condition. And so in engagement with my Black comrades, I understood that you don't just drop dead due to complications from sickle cell anemia. There had to be an accelerator, there had to be an incident, there had to be something that drives that condition to exacerbate and cause death. And what happened was there was eventually a video that was released that actually showed the guards in a juvenile boot camp pummeling young Martin Lee Anderson until he collapsed. And it enraged us. That was the moment where I recognized exactly what was happening to Martin Lee Anderson, the cover-up that was going to happen to Martin Lee Anderson, and how there would never be justice unless we did something. And I recognized it because I'd seen it so many times in Palestine, where you're not even going to get an inquisition into what happened. So here they were covering this thing up, and I really, my life was changed forever through this experience. I had a chance to collaborate with students from FAMU, which is a HBCU right down the street from Florida State University, and Tallahassee Community College. And we decided we were going to take over the governor's office. And at that time, the governor was Jeb Bush. And and interestingly enough, how things come full circle. When we first went into the office to take over the office and to conduct our sit-in, they told us that Jeb Bush was actually out of the country in Iraq because he had gone to visit a military base and support the troops. So I didn't think about that until the last couple of years, but not only were we demanding Jeb Bush get back because he had to deal with this travesty that occurred in his home turf, but we wanted Jeb out of Iraq, and we wanted troops out of Iraq, and we wanted that unjust, illegal war to be ended. And so it was interesting, and I never really fully thought about it until recently, that we needed him to be home for many reasons. And we conducted our sit-in. So we slept on the floor. We came in dressed in suits. We wanted to promote an image of professionalism and student leaders that took ourselves very seriously, because we knew that if we came dressed a certain other way, they would paint a certain picture. And so our thought was, we're going to come to you in suits the way we dress up for Student Senate, and we're going to represent to the best of our ability. So we sat there for 20 some odd hours, slept on the floor, and about hour 36, we're sitting on the floor, arms locked, and we're singing freedom songs together, which is, I think such a powerful part of the movement when you can sing and dance and participate in the arts together. It's really incredibly uplifting in these challenging moments where we feel defeated, to use song and to use dance and to use Debka and any other opportunity to connect as human beings. Yes, absolutely. So I just, this moment changed my life forever. We're locked arms and we're sitting on the floor, and the doors to the governor's office pop open, and it's Attorney Benjamin Crump, who was at that time Martin Lee Anderson's attorney, and many of you all know Benjamin now from, Trayvon Martin's family and so on and so forth. But he walks in, and on his right side is the mother, and on his left side is the father holding his arms, and they had tears streaming down their faces. And they just simply were looking at us with great appreciation, saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And at that moment in time, young 21-year-old male, I had been taught, you don't cry, you don't show your emotions. And I couldn't help it, tears started going down my face. And I'll never forget, my friend Cindy was next to me, and she said, Ahmed, it's okay. And we had this amazing moment where I could be vulnerable in front of people, but also I recognized our power, right? Like, that family would not have had that opportunity to fight for justice for their son if the masses, if the people, if the students didn't demand it, didn't put our bodies on the line for it. And so that's kind of when I knew I wanted that for the rest of my life. I wanted that feeling of actually making an impact in people's lives. And, fast forward, the same thing happened in 2012 with Trayvon Martin. After undergrad, we all had went our separate ways because, I went to law school. My other colleagues went into their professional fields. And then Trayvon was killed. And I was actually in Amsterdam at the time, visiting my father, who was living in the area. And I just remember getting a call from my comrades who we started organizing with in college. And they said, young black boy was just killed, walking to his father's home. He had Skittles in an Arizona tea, and he lost his life. And I remember just telling him, it was like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. at the time, because, we're ahead a few hours over there. And I said, I'm not coming back to do this unless we build something lasting, build something permanent.
Wow.
And so we launched the Dream Defenders, and we started by an action of marching 40 miles from Daytona Beach's Bethune-Cookman College to Sanford, Florida. And we did that because it was just around the anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery march that Dr. King led. And so here we were again being called back to action. And I decided at that time that, I was going to commit myself fully. So the first 2 years of Dream Defenders, I worked unpaid, just like many of our team members worked unpaid. Yeah. And it was some tough years, but you know what, like now, first of all, it was all worth it. But now the pride that I get in looking at Dream Defenders and their evolution, since people like myself and Philip and others had left, I'm just incredibly fortunate to have been a part of it and thankful for that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Ahmed, thank you for sharing these stories. And you probably saw in the chat, like, folks are saying thank you. And someone said that these stories have brought them to tears. And thank you for sharing your story. It's truly mobilizing. And I think these are the stories, especially that young folks need to hear, because you were 21 at the time that first sit-in happened, right? And then later on after law school, making a decision that this is where you needed to be and how you needed to serve. And I think it's so important to share these stories, because I think a lot of folks are going through similar emotions right now and wanting to do something, right? Like, we hear that a lot. What can I do right now because of what has happened over the summer with the uprisings, right? How do I engage in on my campus? How do I get involved in my community? So I think your stories are extremely inspiring. And I wanted to, so deep breath, because you've talked a lot about both, the Black radical tradition that has influenced you. You talked about relationships with folks in the Black community and the Latinx community that inspired you and kind of held you up. And you talked about, obviously, your experiences growing up in Palestine, right? I also wanted to shout out that a lot of your close friends are on here. I think I saw Russia.
I love it. It's beautiful. Yes. Beautiful. I love y'all. Thank you. And thank you for all the comments.
Thank you for joining. So if you are joining, if you have a question for Ahmed about his work, we're going to talk in a little bit about where Ahmed is right now, which is the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. But if you are interested in asking any questions about his own experiences, please feel free to do that. So one of the things that you mentioned, Ahmed, that I wanted to bring up is this. I don't know if you'll remember this, but I've kept this for a long time. Do you remember this poster?
Yeah, that's the Palestine Solidarity Committee. Is that what that is from Ferguson?
So this is actually a poster from when we were in Ferguson, Ferguson October, which was a range of solidarity events when Black activists in Ferguson sort of invited folks to come in for solidarity actions. This was obviously the fall after Michael Brown was shot and killed in Ferguson that folks will remember. And I do think this is where we met. Because this poster is something that I grabbed from there. And one of the things that I recognized while we were in Ferguson was the total, the solidarity that came from the Palestinian community and the Muslim community, right, around connecting. So it says here, the hashtag is Palestine to Ferguson. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why have these connections, right, been so important between Black communities in the U.S. and Palestinians? What is it about Ferguson and Palestine that made that connection so strong? So if you could just talk a little bit about that,
sure.
Just to share with folks.
Sure, yeah. And I think, we always have to lift up the history, the folks whose shoulders we stand on. And so anytime I talk about Black and Palestinian solidarity, I have to let folks know that it didn't start with Ferguson and it didn't start with the Dream Defenders. And in fact, it was something that the Black radical tradition had started with in the 60s and 70s. And so I want to lift up SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that came out with a statement on Palestine that they faced immense backlash for. I want to lift up Malcolm X, who once he visited Cairo, actually traveled into Gaza and began building with Palestinians at that point. I want to lift up Angela Davis, who to this day is teaching us lessons about abolition and what a future free of these systems can look like, in addition to the necessity for solidarity between our communities. I want to lift up the Black Panther Party, which, has impacted us domestically, but also internationally. So the free breakfast program is something that, many folks may not know is in our schools because of the Black Panther Party. But the Black Panther Party were also internationalists. They made that very clear that they stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And they did this via action. They traveled to the refugee camps in Lebanon. They met with the PLO and Palestinian organizers in Algiers. And so, we have to lift up that this work has been done by so many before us. And another favorite I always have to lift up is Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. These folks paved the way. And so how did we get to the Ferguson moment? Well, in addition to these anti-colonial points of solidarity that brought the Palestinian and the Black American community together, you have these most recent formations between U.S. police forces and Israeli military training. Right. And what happened in Ferguson was the folks realized that the same tear gas canisters that were being shot at in the streets of Ferguson were the exact same U.S. manufactured tear gas canisters that we were being shot at in Palestine. Mm-hmm. We were being shot at within Palestine. And so Palestinian activists who had been paying attention to what's happening, and I think I want to lift up the power that we've seen through social media, because the Ferguson moment was born through social media. And all folks around the world started to figure out, something is going down in Ferguson. And once Palestinians recognized the tear gas, they immediately reached out saying, look, this is how you actually need to combat the tear gas. This is what you wash your eyes out with. This is the direction you need to run in. If you stand close to them, they can't shoot the tear gas at you. So there was these different lessons that were being exchanged in that live moment. And that was something that I think resonates to this day, because we continue to see the militarization of police as an issue. And now we're actually getting to the point where we can have the conversation about defund the police. So all respect and love to all the organizers across the country who have been leading on those efforts to make sure that this is a conversation that we can have. I also want to add that, it's the local folks who are driving these impacts a lot of times. So we came, Deepa, from outside of St. Louis and Ferguson, and we visited, but we joined efforts that local folks were leading in this solidarity. And so I want to mention a brother that's very dear to many of us, and we lost, unfortunately, Bassem Masri.
Yeah.
Bassem was one of the frontline activists in Ferguson. In fact, many of us actually watched his videos. That's how we got connected to Ferguson. We saw this loud, passionate, aggressive Palestinian activist who was unapologetic about the parallels that he saw between what was happening to Black Americans and what happened to Palestinians back home. Yeah. And not only was Bassem, I think, someone that I'll always think fondly of and remember his impact, but his father. If you remember, Deepa, we got a chance to go to his father's store, right?
I was about to say, yeah, we visited his father's store and the gazebo that had been constructed right outside of it. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so when we're in a moment where we're questioning what the dynamics and what the relationships look like between Arab store owners and Muslim store owners and Black communities or Latinx communities or indigenous communities, and how our relationship is conducted with these communities, it was beautiful to see Zuhdi Masri, Bassem's father, greeted with such love in the community. So not only the projects, but the man had actually negotiated ceasefires between gangs. Within the hour that we were sitting there, we saw multiple Black individuals, Black community members come in and say, uncle or dad. We learned stories about people's college tuition that he was helping to pay. I mean, it was just an immense amount of pride that I felt in that moment for being Palestinian. So I wanted to lift up not only the historic nature of the connection, not only the systemic parallels between the militarization and the state-sanctioned violence and the mass incarceration and all that we all face, but also these local stories of people who had it in their fabric of their DNA to reach out to the community members and want to leave a lasting impact.
That was so powerful, all of it. And I'm really appreciative of you actually grounding us in history first, because I think that there is this sense that a lot of this is new, but it isn't, right? It has actually been, people have been doing this work, talking about it. Maybe they didn't get the attention, but it has been baked into the DNA. Solidarity is, I often say, it's a verb and a practice, but it's a very natural practice that people engage in, right? It is that reaching out to your neighbor. It is that reaching out to even people that you don't know who live, countries away from you, right? But I really am so appreciative that you grounded us in the history, and folks were saying that also in the chat. But also the really important part about what I learned when I was there, right, is the occupation of a place like Ferguson, which was basically occupied, by law enforcement and the state and then the feds. And what is obviously happening in Palestine, the occupation of Palestine in many ways, there was a connection that was being formed there. And that's where the Coliberation, right, this idea of mutual liberation is so important. It is also a cornerstone of solidarity practice. And that's why, when I looked up, when I lift up this poster, that's what it means to me. It means this part around from Palestine Ferguson is really a co-liberation statement in so many ways. And yes, thank you for lifting up Mr. Masri. And I think that's another story that people don't know enough about, that, at least in Ferguson, we visited with Arab, Muslim, South Asian shop owners in the area. And yes, the message that we got was, we're connected to the Black community, and Black folks have been in here for decades, right, years, and we don't see them as customers. We see them as our neighbors. We see them as our friends. So I think that that's a really, not to say that it is always like that.
Yeah,
that's right. That there aren't fissures and fractions, and
that's right.
So we don't want to paint like this rosy picture, right? But I think sometimes people don't get that, the other part. So what is possible with the potential? So so if you're joining us, I'm in conversation with Ahmad Abuznaid, a dear friend of mine, and someone that I've been so lucky to get to know over the years. And he is now the director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. And if you are joining us, if you have questions, I saw a couple of questions. So I think I'm going to ask you one of the questions that came in. But if you do have questions, please go ahead and ask them. Well, this one's important. It's interesting, and it's a good segue to what you're doing now. So the question is, what is the best part of your job right now? And so maybe you could tell us a little bit of also within that, what is the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and why is it that you found yourself there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, the best part about my job is I get to wake up every single day and fight for a shifting of U.S. policy towards Palestine, the Palestinian people, and our liberation project. I think not everyone gets to work within their self-interest, within their true passion. So I recognize that as an immense privilege. We've all had jobs that we had to take just because we have to pay the bills. And that's part of the problem here, right? We recognize that that's part of the problem with this system, is that, people all over are not given an opportunity to delve into their passions, to learn a skill that, they really want to get into, rather than having to just worry about paying the bills, which is just a very real dynamic under this system of capitalism, especially this U.S. version of capitalism. So being given the opportunity to actually work for my people as a full-time job is something I don't take lightly. There are only so many jobs out there in the United States where you can engage in Palestinian advocacy. Actually, most organizations will probably fire you if you engage in Palestinian advocacy. But I've been blessed to, kind of have a route that has led me to be prepared for this position. And I'm currently the new executive director, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be leading an organization that is a network of organizations, individuals, and community members all across the U.S. that are working to end military aid to the state of Israel. That is the goal of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and that is the goal of Palestinians in this country as taxpayers, as voters, as people interested in the defense of human rights. We find it is our obligation to make sure that our tax dollars no longer go to supporting apartheid, no longer go to supporting ethnic cleansing and settlements, and any of the flagrant violations of the human rights of the Palestinian people.
And thank you. And I think it just makes so much sense that you're there. I mean, it all fits, to be honest, just knowing you and the path that you've been on. Can you share a little bit about what are some of the campaigns? You said like the main purpose, right? So how does the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights get to that purpose? What are the strategies? And I'm also curious if you can talk a little bit about BDS or some like student campaigns that folks might be interested in learning about.
Sure, yeah. So I'll lift up a couple of our campaigns. One is the Invest in Justice for All coalition that we've worked on with partners like Adala Justice Project and many others. And part of the goal of this campaign is to actually center Palestinian voices. What we found, and it's been done actually via a study recently, and I'm blanking on the person who conducted the study, but it was basically ascertained that out of let's say 600 or so articles that mentioned Palestinians, only maybe 5 of them actually had Palestinians in the article.
Wow.
And so we recognize that we're continually being talked about and not allowed to speak for ourselves. We are in a new moment where we're fortunate enough to have a sitting congresswoman, who is unapologetically Palestinian and is supportive of many of the causes and stances and policies that we like to see for the future of Palestine and for here domestically, right? I think she's just a phenomenal leader that we all want to love and protect.
You might not know, Ahmed is talking about Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib.
That's right.
That's a district in Detroit. Yeah.
That's right. Another campaign I'll lift up is our Stop the ADL campaign. This is a really important campaign because the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, has for decades pretended to be a civil rights org. And in fact, at times they have actually done civil rights work. But what the ADL has also done is spy on Arab institutions, including the ADC and others. What the ADL has also done is support President Trump's move of the Israeli embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. What the ADL has also done is proclaimed the movement for Black Lives to be anti-Semitic because of their solidarity with the Palestinian people. So we can no longer allow for groups like the ADL to infiltrate progressive spaces, and pretend to be a part of the vision that we'd like to see collectively in the world. Because the reality is the ADL continues to support Zionism. And Zionism in the state of Israel means Jews above others. And we would never accept that sort of framework here in the United States. If we were to say, you know, Kansas is going to be for whites and everyone else in Kansas will get treated second, we'd say absolutely not. That is unacceptable. But the ADL and many others, AIPACs, J Street, you know, Christians United for Israel, all these groups have no issue with Jewish supremacy in the Holy Land. And I mean, it would be atrocious if it was any place in the world. But the fact that it's in the Holy Land too adds so much insult to injury. The fact that you can proclaim that this is a connection to God and a promise from God to allow for you to continue this ethnic cleansing and this anti-Arabization, this apartheid of people, and use the name of God or use the word of God is truly astounding. But that's the reason why organizations like the ADL are very dangerous, because they occupy space in these progressive groups and these progressive coalitions. And that's part of the reason why we never see Palestine uplifted to being one of the policy items. That's part of the reason why in the Democratic platform, they fight against, you know, including the words occupation in relation to Palestine. You talked about BDS. You know, BDS for us is one of the main strategies.
Do you mind explaining it for folks?
Yeah. Absolutely. So BDS is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The boycott is something that we can all participate in. Divestment is something many of us can participate in. And sanctions is something that we're going to hopefully continue to pressure our government until they actually place sanctions on the state of Israel, which continuously violates the human rights of Palestinian people for 70 plus years now. And so why BDS? Well, Palestinians have tried direct negotiation with the Israelis. We've tried going to the United Nations. We've tried going to the International Criminal Court. We've tried international advocacy in countries around the world, and we still have no justice. And so really learning from the spirit of the South African anti-apartheid struggle, and really learning from the spirit of the Southern civil rights struggle, and the use of boycotts and divestment to drive home those changes and the impact that we saw internationally is one of the main routes that Palestinians can take, and one of the most empowering routes, right? Because it's where do I put my dollar, right? I have a certain finite amount of dollars in my time, and where am I going to allocate those resources? Will I continue to purchase products that are actively invested in the oppression of people abroad and domestically? And how about divestment? Will I continue to allow for my university or my city council to invest in bonds that profit directly off of the oppression, of the killing, of the ethnic cleansing of people? Absolutely not. And so we each have the power to decide where we're going to spend our dollars. Now, I have to mention that because BDS has been so successful in isolating Israel, Israel has pushed back. And of course, because they have institutions like AIPAC and J Street and the ADL and others, they've been able to pass measures in states all across the United States to attempt to stifle BDS. So they want you to be afraid. Just know what's so important to know is there is not any law right now in the books against boycotting a US-made product. So let's say there's this Deer Park water I'm drinking. Let's say I have a problem with Deer Park and I want to boycott. There's no law against that. Let's say I want to boycott a product that came from China. There's no law against that.
Right.
The one nation that there are laws to protect a boycott against is Israel. And that should be unacceptable to any American, not just an American that cares about Palestinian rights, but any American who thinks that foreign interference in domestic issues is a flagrant violation of our civil and human rights as Americans. And so I continue to support BDS. I hope we can all support BDS. And I want to lift up that, you know, student organizers have really been the driving force of BDS across the country. Yeah. And another important note here.
One quick thing I wanted to say is, so this is an example of where folks can be co-conspirators, right?
Yeah,
in terms of BDS. And so it is so true. I mean, that there are a lot of Students for Justice in Palestine organizations on various campuses, right? And it is a struggle for a lot of those student groups to survive, because they are oftentimes really attacked, they are ostracized, and so it takes a lot. So being a co-conspirator, right, is actually joining an organization like that as a co-conspirator. It is actually supporting any sort of BDS resolution on campus, right? So I wanted to just lift that up because for the young folks who are listening, this might be one way that you could get involved when it comes to fighting for Palestinian liberation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add on that note of, stepping up and being a part of this solidarity with the Palestinian movement and people is that, there's intense repression. So not just the anti-BDS laws, but students are attacked. They're featured on websites like Canary Mission that attempt to really strike fear, but also really ugly attacks upon young students. People anywhere from 18 to 21 have profiles that promote them as the next Hitler. And actually, for me, I don't care too much about Canary Mission. I don't go to the website. I don't talk about it often. But it had the most frustrating part is when you have family members that Google you and they come to you and say, like, why are they saying these things about you? They're saying really ugly things about you. Or colleagues and friends that say, hey, man, I Googled you, and the first thing that came up was this thing saying that you anti-Semite and you support terrorism. And so I think, like, I want to lift that up because sometimes the most directly impacted folks are going to face repression that maybe others won't face. So similarly to how I know that in this country, I won't be criminalized and brutalized the same way that Black folks will be criminalized and brutalized. Folks have to recognize that for Palestinians, when you're on these lists, it means a loss of opportunities such as jobs and career. And we saw that with Stephen Salaita, who was offered a position and then it was pulled. And we saw that actually most recently again with the University of Toronto, where people are offered positions and then someone complains that they're pro-Palestinian and offers are pulled. But also in traveling, right, internationally. I've been flagged by Department of Homeland Security every single trip coming back internationally. And they ask me the same questions every time. And it actually wasn't until the last time I told them that I'm an attorney that they tried to rush me out of there quickly. But this happens to too many young people that aren't attorneys, that don't know their rights, that don't have someone on speed dial that they can call for legal support. So we have to understand that there's an impact to all this repression. And even if you're not facing it individually, others are. And so it's even more of a reason for you to lean in and dig in and show up in solidarity.
Yeah. And I want to say that there are a lot of organizations and networks and movements that have people's backs, right? And I think that's really important to remember. There are networks of lawyers who are there to assist. There are advocacy organizations like yours and Adala and others who are ready to take a stand or uplift some sort of egregious act that has happened to someone, right? I mean, if you all go to the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights' Twitter page, you'll see that. You'll see these examples. So I think it's also important to know that we're building community so that folks aren't alone. And actually, I have a question on that vein, in that vein. So a lot of folks are saying yes to all of what you're saying and really appreciate the grounding on history and saying that they're learning a lot. So if you have questions for Ahmed, please go ahead and put them into the chat. We have about 15 more minutes. But there's this one question, sort of related to this idea of, so I also, when we talk about solidarity, we say that it's a lot of this is about relationship building, right? Mm-hmm. And you have done that in many ways. I know that you have organized these delegations of Black activists from the U.S. to visit Palestine and connect with Palestinian activists on the ground. You've done that, right? You and I are part of something called the Solidarity Summit Network, where we've had a lot of time to build relationships with each other and trust. And I think this is really key, right? Like, I know that if I need something, Ahmed is one of my people that I can text and it'll be an immediate response and he'll have my back, right? And
that's right.
So this question is like, what is the advice for relationship and friendship building in this work? Especially if you're working across backgrounds and upbringings. How do you build that trust? And I would add, why is that such an important part of solidarity work?
Yeah.
Why is trust and relationship so important?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, we have to trust the folks that we go into battle with, and make no mistake about it, we're in a battle right now for justice, both domestically and in Palestine. And so why one of the things that we would do to really build strong relationships is to understand people's self-interest. So we would do, when we first begin to build with someone within Dream Defenders, we would have a one-to-one. And in the one-to-one, you want to listen more than you're talking. And then you switch, and then the other person's going to listen more than they're talking. But the point is, you really want to understand what drives the individual across from you. And that's how you end up finding out, if I text them, are they going to hit me back? If I say, like, this is the moment, we all need to be in the streets right now, get your boots strapped up, we're there. Like, how do you know that that person's going to be there? Because you engage in a deep practice of relationship building, and that involves identifying that person's self-interest. So what I recognize with a lot of these individuals from Dream Defenders and the Movement for Black Lives, and also indigenous folks that we were able to take on these delegations, is that we had a similar world vision. We had a similar view of these structures and these systems that have continued to hold our people back for decades and centuries, even for some communities. And until you have that understanding of what clearly is the ambition and the self-interest and the passion, the person across from you, you can't really build a solid relationship. You can have a surface level relationship. You could go hang out at the bar or at happy hour with those folks, but like someone that you can call at 2 a.m. and say, hey, look, someone just got arrested. We're in front of the police station. We need to be throwing down right now. You're not going to get someone out just because y'all both like the same popcorn, right? You need to understand what that person wants to see out of this world, out of their lives. And what I've found is that, there's so many people in this country within this movement that really ultimately care about Palestinian rights and about all human beings. And so taking these delegations was really impactful, because it wasn't just about these Black Americans and indigenous folks and Latinx folks seeing Palestine and understanding what we're dealing with on the ground. It was also watching them internalize what they were saying and relating it back to their experience. So what I witnessed is that, as we were engaging with Palestinians who live within the state of Israel, and deal with the difficulty of discrimination and second-class citizenship status, the delegates began to have a conversation around what desegregation meant and what integration into this system meant. And so I remember, Dr. King's words where he says, I feel like I have brought my people into a burning house. I've led my people into a burning house. And we have these amazing discussions around, what did desegregation really mean? What should Palestinians seek? Should we seek to assimilate into the system? Or do we want to continue to look to abolish this system and create something new? So these are just brilliant conversations that we get to have. Also for indigenous folks, we got a chance to take Frank Wong, an amazing indigenous hip hop artist from the Lakota tribe. We got a chance to take him a couple of years ago. And the amazing parallels to what happened to his ancestors and what was currently in modern day happening to my people was astounding. So at one point, he and I pulled out our different IDs, and we recognized that indigenous folks used to have to keep separate IDs and used to have to get permits to travel between one reservation to another. And of course, even the life within a reservation, we can see that Palestinians have been made to live in camps, both within historic Palestine and across the region. So we recognize that the lack of freedom of movement, the ethnic cleansing, the blockades all around us in encircling of our people and communities by the occupier, by the colonizer, were things that we had seen done here, were things that had been done in Africa and in Latin America, and are now actively being done on the ground in Palestine.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And really want to lift up again that one-on-one relationship building that you talked about, and that it's a long-term thing, right? It doesn't happen immediately. It takes time to build, and it takes like these common experiences that you talked about that people have, where they're understanding, I see you and you see me, and we have these things in common, right?
That's right.
They really build it. So as we kind of come to a close, and if folks have more questions, put them in. I wanted to ask you, if you were to give three steps for people young folks especially, but others as well who are watching, who want to get involved in global solidarity, particularly around Palestine, what are three things that folks should be doing? And especially talk to people who might be completely new, right, to the issue at all. So what are three things that you might say?
Yeah, that's great. So the first thing I would suggest is education. So, even myself, we can all do better to get more educated on a range of subjects, including Palestine. So I would recommend The Question of Palestine by Edward Said. And for a more recent read, the Justice for Some by Noor Arakat. And we could start with those. But there's so many, like authors like Rashid Khalidi, and others that you can gain so much insight on the history of Palestine and the colonization of our land and our people. So the first thing I would say is education. Educate yourself. And the reality is also, it doesn't have to be just through books. There are organizations like USCPR, like the IMEU, like the Adalah Justice Project, like the Students for Justice in Palestine, organizations that are out there to be resources for you to learn.
Yeah, so there are also like film festivals and cultural production. You mentioned Noura, and I heard her today on WAMU talking about the DC Palestinian Film Festival that's happening, right? And so there's so much cultural production that is also an avenue for folks to learn from. So
that's right.
But go ahead.
No. Thank you for lifting it up. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the arts are absolutely essential to us communicating our message. Sometimes standing at a podium and giving a speech about human rights is not the kicker for some people. They may need to see it through film or through song or through dance or through poetry, right? I mean, I want to lift up Aja Monet and June Jordan and many of the poets that, have helped, the US-based community understand a little bit about what's going on, but also Mahmoud Darwish, the famous poet from Palestine. The second thing I would say, we all need to understand how we can individually make an impact. What do I mean by that? What is your skill set, right? What are you uniquely situated to do for the movement for Palestine that others aren't situated to do? Again, are you a poet? If you're a poet, there's no need to reinvent the wheel and for you to all of a sudden need to become, a political advocate. Poetry is just as powerful as being a political advocate. In fact, poetry is political. So I lift that up to say that we all have to do some soul searching and really think deeply about how we can create the greatest impact based on our skill sets, based on our experience, based on our vantage point. Where are you? For instance, even if it's just regionally, where are you? How can you make an impact locally if you're in Dearborn or if you're in Raleigh, North Carolina, right? So understanding our place regionally, geographically, characteristically, skills-wise, our place within the movement, answering that, because everyone has a role in the movement. The third thing, after you've now done some research and after you've really defined for yourself how you think you can make an impact, you reach out to the groups that are doing the work. So the great thing about the U.S. campaign is we're able to work with folks on local levels all across the country. So we work with organizations in Chicago and Durham and in Miami and in California and so on and so forth. And these are folks in your local community that are doing the work. And again, on your college campus, there's probably a Students for Justice in Palestine. So what you want to do is, once you understand the issue, once you know how you can make an impact, you want to reach out to a group and get active. And again, that all looks differently for each of us. So it may not mean showing up to the protest. It may mean calling your congresswoman or congressman. It may mean engaging your city council in a bid to boycott Israeli bonds investments, such as what we saw Durham, North Carolina do. So the opportunities are limitless. We're in a moment where we need all hands on deck. And truthfully, I really believe that we will win.
Yes, we have to. We must. Thank you. That was super clear in terms of those three pieces. And love what you said about figuring out your role. So we've been talking about that. We've been talking about the social change map, the ecosystem, and where folks see themselves. So really want to make sure that folks have the tools. Their tools exist. The organizations exist, right?
That's right.
And so it's really about thinking about what it is that you feel called to do and understanding that we can't do all of it all the time, but what are the most effective ways in which we can show up if we're needed?
That's right.
Last question, which is a question I've been asking everybody. You know this. I mean, you've been doing this work for decades. It is not always easy to sustain ourselves when we do this work, right?
Yeah.
We get burnt out. We feel fatigued. It can be extremely traumatic. We just talked actually in the Solidarity semester on Tuesday about how do we nourish ourselves?
Yeah.
And what depletes us, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding that we do get depleted. That yes, there is joy and purpose in this work. A lot of it is because of the relationships and friendships we have with each other, right? But it's also, it can be toxic, it can be fatiguing, it can be difficult. And what is it that you do in order to nourish yourself so that you can stay in it for the
Yeah.
long term?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing I want to lift up is a lesson I learned from a mentor and dear friend of the both of ours named Vincent Warren, currently the director of Center for Constitutional Rights. And, I was sharing with Vince that in the first couple of years of Dream Defenders, obviously we weren't funded. We were all overwhelmed, spread so thin, working without pay. And I just remember telling him how exhausted I was. And he was like, brother, the work will go on if you say no sometimes. And so the first thing I want to lift up is, like, we have to be comfortable saying no, or understanding that we don't have to be at every protest or at every meeting or speaking at every press conference. We have to know that our bodies at times call on us to sit back, to take a breather. And if we don't, then we can hurt ourselves, both mentally, physically, emotionally, all of the above. And so we need to be our best selves in order to really make up the best community that we want to see and create the impact that we'd like to see. So first and foremost, I want to lift up that you just got to be comfortable saying no. And it takes time to get comfortable with that. We feel, we talk about these feelings, that we go through in the movement. Part of it is feeling like a guilt when we're not doing something, right? You have this guilt of like, oh, I took the day off. Stop feeling guilty about taking a day off, okay? Everyone needs time off. Everyone needs a moment to say, I'm not doing any more work. I'm closing down this laptop. Don't call me past this time. It's fine. It's actually required upon us, if we want to bring our best full selves into practice each day, to be able to set up barriers and parameters to make sure that we're taken care of. So I want to lift that up first and foremost, because I think that was a huge lesson for me. I think that's something that when I talk to young activists every day, it's something that I struggle with. So I think, the little things matter so much when we talk about self-care. So I think a nice home-cooked meal, cooking a nice home-cooked meal at times can be therapeutic, but just enjoying a nice home-cooked meal, something warm in your stomach, something that was made with love. And I think like that could be, for me, it's been my wife, it's been my mother, it's been folks around me who've like nourished me through food, and that's been incredibly helpful. But taking a walk, taking a breather, enjoying the sunshine, sitting outside. If you're working from home these days, being able to sit outside if there's some sunshine on a bench or at a park and getting your work done in a way that's, of course, safe and socially distant. But, we're not supposed to be locked up in the house for our lives. And so do it safely. I'm definitely pro-mask and, pro social distancing, but we need connectivity. We need connectivity to the land, to the sun, to water, to ocean, to people, to human beings. And that's the next point I was going to get at, is I've actually, during this time of COVID, I've had an opportunity to get much closer to my parents, not because like we didn't talk before or we weren't close before, but we've gotten closer because the calls have been more frequent. The FaceTimes have been more frequent. My young sister who lives in Portugal, I've been able to FaceTime sometimes, on a daily basis. And, you recognize that those things are really incredibly healing and uplifting for you, right? The joy of your young baby sister as she, tells you about Frozen and, her latest like cartoon or movie that she's fanatic about. Those things really are refreshing and give us pause from like the daily, toughness, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those are great practices and great suggestions. And I think the point is so important to build community even in this time, right? Because we need each other. And so however we can deepen our relationships with each other is important. So with that, I want to thank you, Ahmed, for being part of this. I miss you. I feel like
likewise, Deepa.
Because we usually see each other a couple of times a year, right?
Yep, that's right. I'm looking forward to reconvening with my Solidarity Summit family. But also, now that I'm in the DMV, we're going to link up soon.
Wait, okay, I didn't know this, y'all. I didn't know that Ahmed moved to the DMV from Dearborn. Okay, so this is something we have to talk about. But
that's right.
I'm so glad that you're here. So thank you, Ahmed, for all that you do. You honestly, every conversation we have, I learned something. And obviously I wasn't the only one, because everyone folks are saying thanks for educating and sharing. Thank you for this great conversation. Thank you for being who you are. I have known you for quite some time, I think. And I will say that you are always the same. You are genuine, you're authentic, you're real. And I really appreciate that you don't steer and veer away from that. So deeply appreciate
Thank you so much. Likewise, Deepa. I appreciate you. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation, and keep it up. I hope that folks continue to engage, and we might have to make this thing a consistent a consistent project.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do this again. Absolutely.
Great.
I love it. All right.
Great.
Take care of yourself.
All right, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Peace.
Thank you.
Free Palestine.